What is happening in the brain of somebody when they're dreaming?
Well, I I'll have to tell you two stories about that. Uh, the standard story and the true story, because the standard story that I was taught was that it's all got to do with rapid eye movement sleep. That there's a massive increase in cholinergic activation of the forebrain from the mesopontine tegmentum, and this activates the cortex randomly. And then, the cortex kind of, to quote Alan Hobson, who was the authority at the time that I trained, to quote him, the cortex makes the best of a bad job by joining the dots and turns this chaotic, meaningless activation from below of the cortical mantle, turns it into some kind of episodic experience. So that was the standard view. My own research that you alluded to showed that that standard view was wrong. First of all, if you have damage to the mesopontine tegmentum and you lose REM sleep, you still have dreams. And secondly, there are areas of the forebrain which, when lesioned, lead to a loss of dreaming with preservation of REM sleep. So dreaming and REM sleep are not the same thing. They correlate, but they're not identical. Um, so the part of the brain that does generate dreaming, as opposed to REM sleep, doesn't arise from the mesopontine tegmentum, and it's not cholinergic. It arises from the ventral tegmental area, and it's dopaminergic. So what's going on in the brain when we're dreaming? Something arouses us, whether it be REM sleep or the relative activation of cortex as we descend into sleep at sleep onset, or the relative activation of the brain by cortisol mechanisms in the rising morning phase of the diurnal rhythm. All of these relatively aroused states of the brain, not uniquely to do with REM. There are three common arousal phenomena, let alone the odd things that can happen ad hoc, during the night. This arousal has to attract motivational interest. It has to trigger dopaminergic, the mesocortical, mesolimbic dopaminergic activation. That's what produces the dream. The hallucinatory delusional experience is a hyperdopaminergic state, just as it is in wakeful psychosis. Um, I think the single most important thing. So that's my answer to your question. In a way, you said what's going on in the dreaming brain. I'm saying, well, that's the old story. This is the true story. And then I'd like to add, I think the most important thing about dreaming is its sort of defining feature, which is that it's a state of consciousness that punctuates the unconsciousness of sleep. So the answer as to what is dreaming, why do we dream, what's this all about, I think it is intimately intertwined with the question of consciousness. So why do we become conscious while we're sleeping is the same question as why do we dream. And so to understand what consciousness is for is to take us a very long way toward understanding what dreaming is.
Beautiful. I love that response. It's from your work that I really learned that REM sleep and dreaming weren't quite as tightly correlated as I assumed them to be, and thought they were from my own neuroscience degree and from the sleep guests that I have had. Because I think that association is still very widely held. If your REM is disrupted, that's going to affect your sleep. Or your dreaming. It's going to affect your emotional integration, all of the rest. Do you think it's a controversial statement to say that we are conscious when we're dreaming? Do you think that neuroscientists would all agree with that statement?
To me, as I said a moment ago, it's definitional of dreaming. What do we mean by a dream if we don't mean a conscious experience while we're sleeping? That there is good reason to believe that there are all kinds of cognitive processes going on while we sleep, throughout sleep, that we're not conscious of. There's all memory consolidation is the obvious one. there's oodles of evidence that active memory consolidation processing goes on during sleep, but we're not conscious of it. We're conscious only of the dreams. And to the extent that we are conscious of our cognition during sleep, to that extent we call it dreaming.
Yes. Do you think a typical feature of consciousness is a responsiveness to stimuli? I think that might be commonly when people are listing off a laundry list of kind of what is consciousness. One of them that might typically be there is, being able to take in an environmental stimulus and respond in a certain way. Do you think what do you think about the way that when we're dreaming and we're asleep, we aren't reacting to our environment in any way? Do you think that we are still reacting in our dreams in a certain sense?
Yeah, so that's my answer to your question as to whether consciousness can be described as responsiveness to stimuli. I think that there are all kinds of problems with that definition. One of them pivots on what do you mean by stimuli. If you mean extraceptive stimuli, then dreaming is the perfect example that that's not true, because the state of sleep is characterized by a withdrawal from external stimuli. And again, it's not just a behavioral description that, I mean, it's physiologically demonstrably the case that sensory stimuli are sequestered in the epithelium, in the sensory epithelium during sleep, or at least to the extent that they reach cortex. There's no, it doesn't ignite anything. It's just a little, it fizzles out, more or less in the primary projection cortex. So dreaming is a highly conscious state, but it's highly questionable to describe it as response to sensory stimuli. If it includes response to endogenous stimuli, and by stimuli one doesn't just mean an event, but rather a process, then yeah, sure, you could say that. But then I would also need to add, leaving aside dreams for a moment, that there are it is possible to be conscious without being responsive to stimuli. So, for example, in minimally conscious states, or in what's called non-responsive wakefulness, it
Yeah.
used to be called the vegetative state. The very name, non-responsive wakefulness, implies you can be conscious without being responsive. And of course, locked-in syndrome is a very dramatic example of the kind. Although they are minimally responsive, it's so I don't think that these two things, responsivity and consciousness, are the same thing. I think the reason that we um, correlate them, or the link them in the way that we do, especially clinically, is because you have to have some rough and ready way, of determining whether and to what degree a patient is conscious. The Glasgow Coma Scale, which is the standard measure that we use clinically, is just a measure of responsivity. That's what it is. Three different kinds of responsivity. So it's a very rough and ready way of, sort of gauging, is this patient conscious, and if so, how much consciousness is there? But they're not the same thing
Yeah.
in any precise sense of the terms.
No, I think that's completely fair. The examples you gave there are very good, and I think do indicate that they are separate. I kind of mentioned that it might be one on a list, but I think the examples you gave are pretty good exceptions to that. Is there a reason that we have to play out this mass of cortical activation in a story? Would it have been possible, do you think, for us to have all of the natural benefits of dreaming physiologically without us having to play out these stories in our sleep? Would it have been possible to integrate all of the emotional um circuitry that we were living during our wakefulness? Did we need to play it out in story in our sleep?
I think that we have to, at this point in our conversation, we have to distinguish between um, what is known and what is plausible. I don't think that we really know why dreams take the form that they do. We know that dreams are conscious, as I said to you earlier. I think that's definitional of dreaming. And we know that the consciousness of dreams is, first of all, quite strongly affectively charged. And secondly, the cognitive aspects are quite peculiar. You know, they are they don't have the same coherent structure as waking experience. Why that's the case is a matter for debate. I don't think that we know why. I really don't think that we know why dreams have the peculiarly disjointed narrative structure that they do. I don't even think we know why they have any narrative structure at all.
Yeah.
Um, so there are very rare and unusual dreams which do not have narrative structure. Um, there are what are called blank dreams, and schizophrenic patients in particular describe these blank dreams where there's just pure affect with no narrative structure. But they are the exception. That's the normal dream is an episode in the sense of episodic memory. You know, it's an event, an experience that unfolds over a sequence of time. And it has those two other properties that I mentioned. The one of the narrative being disjunctive, and it's not the normal kind of reasonable, rational, logical experience, and it is strongly affectively charged. Although that also is not an absolutely essential feature of dreams; it's a very typical feature.
Yes. Yeah, really well said. I was speaking to someone who runs an aphantasia organization called Tom Ebier. Have you heard of aphantasia before?
Yes, yes, I have.
Yeah, so just for the audience, so just the inability to visualize images in your mind's eye. And we were talking about what dreaming is like for people with aphantasia. And he says that when he wakes up, he doesn't dream very often, but when he does, he wakes up and he gets kind of a stream of words come into his mind. And this was blowing my mind because I was just like, that's such a interesting idea that it can be so different. And he said there isn't really an emotional content to it. It's very conceptual. It's just streams of words, absolutely no images, absolutely no sense of emotion or touch or movement or structure, simply words. In your research, have you seen just the variance in how people dream and the variance in the sensory modalities people recruit to their dreams? Because I think this is just such an interesting area of research.
Yeah. You know, I when I first started to research brain mechanisms of dreaming and the weird and wonderful things that happen to dreams with lesions to different parts of the brain, I began that research in the mid 1980s, and I don't know if aphantasia was a thing yet. I
Wasn't.
don't. It
Not by
wasn't.
name.
Okay, but the interesting
Yeah.
thing is that there were cases reported long before the word aphantasia was introduced in the early neurological literature. Charcot, the famous, brilliant neurologist Charcot, published a case, I think it was 1889, of a man who, although he never went to autopsy, so we can't be sure, seems to have had a posterior cerebral artery stroke. And he lost the capacity to conjure up visual imagery. And it was later termed irreminiscence, visual irreminiscence. So that was the term that preceded aphantasia.
Right.
And
Good
Charcot's
story.
patient continued to dream, but there was no visual imagery in the dreams. And
Yes.
then there was a case by Wilbrandt a little bit later, where it was in 1890 or 1891 or something, where the patient said she dreamt almost not at all anymore, and it wasn't clear whether that meant that it had denuded perceptual content, or if she only had very occasional dreams. But in any event, following those early leads, I did a systematic study of what happens with damage to different cortical areas. And I can tell you all sorts of things. First of all, I confirmed what Charcot described. Um, I had several cases who lost particular aspects of their visual waking perception. So, for example, a patient who's prosopagnosia doesn't see faces in his dreams, a patient who, like Charcot's case, had visual irreminiscence. He had auditory and somatosensory dreams with no visual content. I had a patient with achromatopsia who had black and white dreams, a patient with akinetopsia who had akinetopsic dreams, and so on. But also
Sorry,
odd
what is an
things.
akinetopsic dream, real quick on that one? Just
Akinetopsia is you don't see flowing movement. You
right.
see static images, jerky images.
Yes.
Like in like
So
in
so
like in an
fascinating.
old movie.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
Frames.
but there also are odd dissociations that you wouldn't expect. Like, for example, cortically blind patients are not blind in their dreams. They in fact have unusually vivid visual dreams, even though they're cortically blind during waking perception. And it's not only all of these things I'm telling you. Others have confirmed these observations. So these are not just according to Mark Solms. These are
Yes.
recognized clinical phenomena now. And brokers aphasics who cannot speak fluently, they do speak fluently in their dreams. Um, Patients who are hemiplegic in waking life are not hemiplegic. These are from cortical motor strip lesions. They're not
Yes.
hemiplegic in their dreams. So there's a very complex relationship between what we perceive and cognize in our dreams and what we do in similar vein in waking life. It's not a one-to-one mapping of the one
Yes.
onto the other.
Yes, you might be from. I love all of that. That's so interesting. I am. I had people in the comment section of that video also saying they dreamt in black and white, which I'd never heard of before as well. I am. You might be familiar that Adam Zeman is. He's one of the preeminent aphantasia researchers at the moment, and he did a very large survey. I believe one of the biggest surveys of people with aphantasia, and he discovered in that survey that 63% reported dreaming in pictures. And this was such an interesting finding for me. I mean, it backs up everything that you've just been saying there. That it seems like the neural mechanism for voluntary imagery seems distinct from the neural mechanism from involuntary imagery, which is a really weird idea. And you just gave so many other interesting examples how that's the case. But do you know any idea why that is?
Um, I don't actually. I think that it makes a kind of common sense that involuntary, something being replayed in the mind's eye by dint of your trying to conjure it up is a different sort of thing from what occurs during dreaming, which is really an hallucination. Hallucinations are very different from trying to picture something in your mind's eye.
Yes.
So it's not entirely surprising that there are these kinds of dissociations. But I don't have a detailed. I won't. What I can tell you is the the idea, which is the one that was current when I started work in the 1980s in that area, namely the idea of Hobson's, the activation synthesis hypothesis, that what's happening is the cortex is being activated, and therefore you're having multimodal perceptions and cognitions which just get joined up into the dream. That I think is definitely not the case for the reason that I've said that the areas of cortex which we know are lesioned are not producing imagery during waking cognition, like in a cortically blind patient or in a hemiplegic patient or whatever. And yet in their dreams, such images occur. And I think that the simplest explanation for that is that dreams are not patchworks of current activation of cortex. They are drawing upon long-term memory. So it is long-term memory that is being replayed for whatever reason in this hallucinatory fashion, which is a very different thing from mental imagery, guided imagery of the kind that we were
Right.
talking about earlier.
Right, makes sense. Have you heard of David Eagleman's hypothesis on why we dream, where his idea is that the visual cortex needs to be active at night. Otherwise, other neural territory will encroach on it and start stealing neurons for their own assemblies and you'll lose visual cortex in the night. What do you think about that? How plausible do you think that is?
I've never understood this. Why should this apply to visual cortex and not to every other type of cortex? You know, why do we need to protect visual cortical territory during sleep and not auditory cortical territory or somatosensory
Right.
cortical territory? So I just that I truly don't understand. I mean, I don't understand the premise of his theory, so I don't buy it.
Makes sense. Yeah, makes sense. Does everybody dream? Are there cases where people just don't dream at all?
No, there are cases of people who don't dream at all, but they are, for the most part, patients with definite, identifiable neurological lesions. Most people who say, most people who say in the everyday course of things, "I don't dream," put them in a sleep laboratory, wake them up during REM sleep, which is when you are most likely to be dreaming, or for that matter, at sleep onset, in descending stage two, uh, and you get dream reports from them. So it's not that they don't dream, it's that they don't remember their dreams. There is, however, also, and by the way, that's normal. I mean, dreams are not meant to be remembered. It's clearly the case that dreams are highly forgettable things. But when I say that very few people in the normal course of things do not dream, I don't want to give the impression that we all dream the same amount with the same
Yes.
frequency. There is a difference in terms of there are people who have high frequency dreamers and low frequency dreamers, and there are all sorts of things that we've learned that correlate with that. Not least of them being quality of sleep. The more disturbed your sleep is, the more you dream. And
Mm.
this goes back to what we were saying earlier about consciousness in response to stimuli. It seems as if dreams are a response to disturbances of sleep. And that can be interpreted in all sorts of ways. There are a few people who do not have demonstrable focal lesions of the brain and who nevertheless do seem not to dream. But these are people like, for example, Turner syndrome, which is a chromosomal disorder. There are cases of this kind who don't dream. There's no obvious gross uh, 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 um, lesion to the cortex, but there is an underlying, at some level, physiological explanation for it. Kids with or women with Turner syndrome, they do have perceptual and spatial and especially visuospatial cognitive challenges. So the I think the short answer, sorry, I'm giving you an overly long answer, but the short
No, I
answer is
love it.
people
Keep
who say
going.
they don't dream, it ain't necessarily so.
I love every rabbit hole that you go down, so never apologize. I find this so interesting. You mentioned there interestingly that people that people that say they dream a lot generally have more fractionated sleep because that when you wake up, that's when you remember your dream. I was curious, what physiological benefits or negatives do you see in cohorts of people that dream a lot versus dream little? Like, what health benefits are being conferred by dreams or not conferred by not dreaming?
Well, it's kind of embarrassing how little we can say about this.
Right.
And I blame it on the conflation of dreaming with REM sleep because all of the decades of research that have been done on why do we dream and what is its biological function. The way in which various hypotheses were operationalized was through manipulation of REM sleep. So you deprive somebody of REM sleep, you think you're depriving them of dreaming, and so on. So it's really, we know very little. I would answer it on the basis of what little we do know. I would say it's not clear what health benefits dreaming contributes, but there's good evidence to suggest that it participates in aspects of memory consolidation, perhaps in particular the consolidation of non-declarative emotional memories, and it has some function in terms of affect regulation. There's reasonable evidence to suggest this. Um, and perhaps some role in problem solving, although that's in a way to say the same thing. If dreaming participates in memory consolidation, in other words, in learning, uh, and it participates in affect regulation, that what is solving a problem if not uh, uh, regulating an unpleasant affect and learning
Yes.
something. So there's probably are three different ways of saying the same thing. But I would say um, the the strongest evidence, at least coming out of my own lab, as to what dreaming does is that it seems to have some sleep protective function. In other words, when your sleep is disturbed, rather than just wake up, you have a dream. So dreaming seems to be some. It's like a
Interesting.
liminal. It's like a liminal state which mediates this transitional zone between sleep and waking. The fact that we
Interesting.
dream so much upon sleep onset, uh, the traditional figure is 50% of awakenings during sleep onset produce dream reports. In my experience, I mean, I did one study recently where we were trying to do fMRI of the brain as the person fell asleep, and then we wanted to see how does the fMRI image differ between those who reported dreams at sleep onset and those who didn't. In other words, we'd let them fall asleep, we'd image them, and then we'd wake them up and we'd say, were you just dreaming? And in that study, all of them were dreaming. So we couldn't get any non dreamers. So when I say it's a liminal state, it's as you falling asleep. Um, as you wake up in the morning, as I said earlier, the rising morning phase of the diurnal rhythm, you dream, eventually you dream just about all the time in the late morning. And then during REM. What is REM if not it's a disturbing, it's an arousal state which practically, activates the brain back to waking levels. So dreams seem to be some sort of intermediate state between sleeping and waking. And I think that the most powerful biological function, therefore, of dreams is to protect sleep. That's not a small biological function. I mean, sleep is a
Yes.
terribly important thing. So, um, anything that enables us to sleep better is not a trivial adaptive function.
Yeah, makes complete sense. Has there been research done on people that are in the middle of their dreams that they're harder to wake up? As in, like, could dreaming be a way that if there was rustling in the bushes, as in our hunter gatherer ancestors, that it wouldn't wake you up with every environmental stimulus, as you say, it would keep you asleep. So I'm curious: have they sort of charted the stimulus required to get someone to wake up while they're dreaming, and could that be dreaming as a way to kind of rebut that stimulus, as you say, maintain the sleep state?
Yeah. The answer is no, in the sense that I don't know. That it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that it hasn't been done, but I'll tell you why I think it's unlikely to be the case. What you've just said is that I know. I mean, I've done a lot of sleep research. I know what it's like waking up a participant in a sleep study from deep, uh, slow wave sleep compared to waking them up from REM sleep when they're much more likely to be dreaming.
Right.
It's much harder to wake somebody up from slow wave sleep than it is from REM sleep. I also think it's quite hard to operationalize. How do you know whether you're waking somebody up from REM when they're dreaming or from REM when they're not dreaming? But it's quite possible somebody's done some sort of study like that. I think that I don't want it to come across as a kind of blanket statement that if you're dreaming, then you're likely to stay asleep. I think it's much more that if something is disturbing your sleep and you're dreaming, you're more likely to stay asleep despite the disturbance. So it's not that dreaming is the deepest form of dreaming. Sleep is not the deepest form of sleep. The deepest form of
Yes.
sleep is blotto sleep.
Sleep studies sound awful. I mean, you seem like a really nice guy, but I do not want you waking me up when I'm dreaming. Just as I attain some sleep, and you're just shaking me to wake up. It sounds like an awful thing. I hope these participants are compensated well for their time for
Yes.
science.
It is like all research, obviously it's governed by ethical uh, 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 boards, and we have to justify, is there,
Yeah.
what is this, what is the scientific merit of causing this discomfort? And rewarding participants is an ethically questionable practice. I mean, we do, but it's, imagine, it's a slippery slope. If you reward the indigent for participating in very unpleasant research, I'm not sure that that is ethical. It's because they're not, then they don't have a choice because they're indigent. They need the reward, and so on. So it is a delicate sort of issue. But
Right.
many people are interested in their own dreams, are interested in sleep and dream studies. They willingly participate. And just another tiny footnote: we don't wake them up like this.
I know,
It's
I'm aware.
yeah, okay.
You just throw a bucket of water on their head every time, right? A huge, cold, freezing bucket of water.
It's usually an audio recording of their name, calling their name
Ah,
gradually louder. Yeah.
very interesting.